In the cold depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic dust, there exists a universal truth that every species learns: never underestimate the quiet ones. They are the storm before the silence, the ember that ignites the wildfire, the single thread that, when pulled, unravels entire empires. Commander Zarathul of the Hegemony had conquered 17 systems. Her fleet had crushed the pride of the Vorthan Empire, turned the crystal cities of Nexus Prime to glass, and made even the war-hardened Krell bend the knee. She had never met a species she couldn't break, a world she couldn't claim, or a warrior she couldn't defeat. Until she met Marcus Chen. He didn't look like much average height, brown hair going gray at the temples, wearing the simple uniform of a merchant vessel. When her boarding party dragged him before her on the bridge of her flagship, she barely glanced up from her tactical displays. Another human, from another insignificant colony world. The galaxy was full of them. Just a human, she had scoffed, her forearms gesturing dismissively while her tactical officers laughed. She had no idea that this unremarkable human carried within him the genetic memory of a species that had clawed its way from cave to cosmos, that had turned every disadvantage into strength, every defeat into lesson, every loss into fuel for an unquenchable fire. She had no idea that humans don't just fight wars, they become war itself. And, in exactly 47 minutes, when Marcus Chen's calm facade finally cracked, Commander Zarathul would learn why humans were the only species in the galaxy with a word for overkill, and why they used it as a starting point, not a warning. The Serenity's edge drifted through the void like a wounded animal, its hull scarred by plasma burns and meteor impacts. From the outside, it looked like what it pretended to be a tired old merchant vessel pushing cargo between the outer rim colonies, barely worth the fuel it burned. Marcus Chen sat in the captain's chair, watching the tactical display with eyes that had seen too much but revealed nothing. "Contact on long-range sensors, Captain," reported Elena Vasquez from the communications station. Her voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had learned to hide fear behind professionalism. "Hegemony configuration. Looks like a battlecruiser." Marcus nodded slowly, his fingers drumming a quiet rhythm against the armrest. The Serenity's edge carried no weapons that would show up on enemy scans, flew no flags that would mark it as anything more than civilian traffic. To any observer, they were exactly what they appeared to be: merchants trying to make a living in the dangerous space between civilized worlds. "Any escort vessels?" he asked, his voice carrying the measured tone of a man who had learned patience in the hardest of schools. "Negative, sir. She's running alone." Strange. The Hegemony rarely sent their capital ships out without support, especially this deep into contested space. Marcus had been tracking their expansion patterns for 3 months, watching them probe deeper into human territory with each passing week. They were getting bolder, more confident. That was their first mistake. The ship shuddered as tractor beams locked onto their hull, yanking them from their planned course. Marcus felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the weight of decisions that would shape the next few hours, perhaps the next few years. He had hoped for more time, more intelligence gathering, more opportunities to study their enemy before making his move. But the galaxy rarely gave you what you hoped for. "Captain, we're being hailed," Elena reported, her hands moving efficiently across her console despite the slight tremor in her voice. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of a Hegemony battlecruiser. Commander Zarathul dominated the display, her forearms gesturing with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Her species, the Kethmori, had evolved from pack hunters on a world where strength meant survival, and it showed in every line of her predatory frame. "Unknown vessel, you are trespassing in Hegemony space," she declared, her translator rendering her words with mechanical precision. "Prepare to be boarded for inspection." Marcus stood slowly, smoothing down his merchant captain's uniform. It was worn and practical, the kind of clothing that suggested long years of honest work rather than military service. The persona he had crafted was perfect in its mundane ordinariness, just another human trying to scratch out a living in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. "Commander, we're just passing through," he replied, affecting the slightly nervous tone of a civilian caught in something bigger than himself. "We have all the proper transit permits and cargo manifests. This is neutral space according to the Galactic Accord of 2387. Zarathul's laugh was like grinding metal. "The Galactic Accord means nothing here, human. The strong take what they will, and the weak surrender what they must. Your permits are worthless paper. The transmission cut off, leaving Marcus staring at empty space on the screen. Around him, his crew went through the motions of panicked civilians securing cargo, checking safety systems, preparing for boarding. They played their roles perfectly, just as they had been trained to do. None of them looked like what they really were. 20 minutes later, the first Hegemony boarding craft attached to their hull with a metallic clang that resonated through the ship's frame. Marcus could hear the cutting torches beginning their work, melting through the outer airlock. They would be through in minutes. Remember, he said quietly to his crew, we're merchants first, last, and always. Let them see exactly what they expect to see. Dr. Sarah Kim nodded from her position at the medical station, her hands busy with what appeared to be routine medical supplies. Chief Engineer Tom Rodriguez was hunched over his console, playing the part of a man trying to keep his aging ship running. Communications Officer Elena Vasquez looked appropriately nervous, her civilian credentials impeccable. The inner airlock hissed open, and Hegemony soldiers poured through in full battle armor. They moved with the confident aggression of troops who had never faced serious resistance, their weapons casually aimed at the human crew. Behind them came an officer whose bearing marked him as someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. You will come with us, the officer announced, his translator giving his words a harsh, mechanical edge. All crew members will be interrogated regarding your true purpose in this sector. Marcus spread his hands in a gesture of resigned compliance. Of course, sir. We have nothing to hide. We're just trying to make a living. The Hegemony soldiers herded them through the docking tube and into the belly of the battlecruiser. Marcus took note of everything, the ship's layout, the number of crew members, the positioning of internal defenses. His trained eye cataloged weaknesses and opportunities while his face maintained the carefully neutral expression of a man trying not to give offense. The battlecruiser's interior was built for war. Corridors ran in straight lines with overlapping fields of fire. Blast doors divided the ship into defensive compartments. Emergency stations were positioned at regular intervals, each one equipped with weapons and armor for the crew. It was an impressive display of military engineering, designed by a species that understood the value of overwhelming force. They were pushed through the corridors like cattle, past crew members who watched with the casual indifference of predators observing prey. The Kethmori were warriors first and foremost, and it showed in everything from their stance to the way they wore their weapons. They had built their entire civilization on the principle that might makes right, expanding through the galaxy by crushing anyone who stood in their way. The bridge of the battlecruiser was a testament to that philosophy. Tactical displays showed the positions of Hegemony fleets throughout this sector of space, marking conquered worlds with symbols of ownership. Star charts detailed planned expansion routes, pushing deeper into human territory with each passing month. It was a vision of methodical conquest, carried out with the precision of a species that had perfected the art of war. Commander Zara Thal stood at the center of it all, her forearms moving in complex gestures as she directed her crew. She turned as the prisoners were brought before her, her predatory gaze fixing on Marcus with the casual assessment of a hunter evaluating potential prey. So, she said, her voice carrying across the bridge with easy authority, the famous human adaptability. I have studied your species extensively, Captain Chen. You spread across the galaxy like a virus, claiming worlds that other species find uninhabitable, surviving in conditions that would kill more sensible beings. Marcus kept his expression carefully neutral, but inside he noted the slip. She knew his name, which meant they had been tracking his ship, probably for weeks. This was not a random encounter, but a planned interception. The question was, how much did they really know? We go where we can make a living, Commander, he replied with the slight deference appropriate to his assumed role. Humans have always been traders and explorers. It's our nature. Your nature, she repeated, her translator rendering the words with electronic precision. Yes, I have read the reports. Humans are curious, adaptable, persistently annoying in their refusal to accept their proper place in the galactic order. You scatter yourselves across hundreds of worlds, never building anything truly impressive, never achieving the kind of unified strength that commands respect. One of her tactical officers approached with a datapad, speaking in rapid Kethmori. Marcus caught fragments through his translation implant, something about cargo manifests and ship registrations. His carefully constructed identity was being put to the test. Your cargo manifest indicates agricultural supplies and basic manufactured goods, Zarathul continued after reviewing the data. Food and tools for the Rim colonies. How perfectly mundane. The colonies need supplies, and we need credits, Marcus replied with a slight shrug. It's honest work. Honest work, she mused, her forearms gesturing in what might have been amusement. How refreshingly naive. Tell me, Captain, what do you know about the human military presence in this sector? The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. Marcus could feel his crew's tension, carefully hidden behind their civilian facades. This was the critical moment, the point where their cover story would either hold or crumble under scrutiny. I don't pay much attention to military matters, he replied carefully. We just try to stay out of the way and avoid any trouble. Wars are bad for business. Zarathul studied him for a long moment, her predatory gaze searching for any sign of deception. Around them, the bridge crew continued their work with the efficient professionalism of a military unit at the peak of its effectiveness. Displays showed tactical information from across the sector, painting a picture of hegemony forces positioning for a major offensive. Wars are indeed bad for business, she agreed finally. Which is why we seek to end them quickly and decisively. Your human colonies in this sector will soon have the opportunity to surrender peacefully and accept hegemony protection. Those who resist will discover the futility of opposing superior force. Marcus nodded as if this information concerned him only in terms of its effect on trade routes and shipping schedules. Inside, he was calculating force distributions and response times, trying to determine how long the human colonies had before the hammer fell. I hope it can be resolved peacefully, he said with apparent sincerity. Violence never solved anything. The bridge crew's laughter was like grinding metal, and Zarathul's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. Violence, Captain Chen, is the final authority from which all other authorities derive. Your species has forgotten this fundamental truth, scattered as you are across 1,000 worlds with no central government, no unified military, no capacity for the kind of decisive action that shapes the fate of civilizations. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing hegemony fleet positions. We have spent 2 years studying your defensive capabilities. Individual colonies with minimal orbital defenses, merchant vessels carrying emergency militias, a few patrol ships scattered across hundreds of light years. You have quantity, perhaps, but no concentration of force, no strategic coherence. Marcus let his gaze wander across the displays, taking in the intelligence they represented while maintaining his expression of polite interest. The hegemony had done their homework, mapping human defensive positions with methodical precision. They knew the location of every major colony, every trade route, every military installation. On paper, it looked like the kind of thorough intelligence gathering that preceded a successful campaign. On paper. Your ships are individually impressive, Zarathul continued, warming to her subject. Human engineering has a certain crude effectiveness. But, you have no fleet doctrine, no coordinated strategy, no central command authority. When we strike, your colonies will fight as individual units rather than as a unified force. They will fall one by one, like wheat before the scythe. That does sound concerning, Marcus replied mildly. Though I suppose it doesn't really affect merchant operations. Cargo still needs to be moved regardless of who's in charge. The commander's expression shifted to something approaching disgust. Spoken like a true human. No vision beyond your immediate profit, no understanding of the larger forces that shape galactic civilization. This is why your species will never achieve true greatness. She turned back to her tactical displays, dismissing the prisoners with a gesture. Confine them to holding cells. We will drop them at the nearest hegemony station for processing. Their cargo can be distributed to our forward bases. As they were led away under guard, Marcus caught Elena's eye for just a moment. The communications officer's expression was perfectly controlled, but he could see the question there. How much longer would they maintain their cover? How much more intelligence could they gather before making their move? The holding cells were located deep within the ship's security section, surrounded by multiple layers of defensive systems. Marcus sat quietly on the narrow bunk, his mind processing everything he had observed during the past hour. The hegemony was indeed preparing for a major offensive, but their intelligence was incomplete. They saw human defensive positions, but they didn't understand what they were looking at. They saw scattered colonies and merchant vessels, but they missed the deeper pattern. They saw the trees, but not the forest. Dr. Kim settled onto the opposite bunk, her medical bag clutched protectively in her lap. To any observer, she looked like exactly what she appeared to be, a civilian doctor caught up in events beyond her control. But Marcus could see the subtle signs that marked her as something more: the way she had instinctively assessed the tactical situation on the bridge, the slight bulge in her medical bag that suggested equipment not typically found in civilian emergency kits, the controlled calm that spoke of extensive training under pressure. "Captain," she said quietly, her voice pitched for his ears alone, "they're planning something big. The timeline they're discussing suggests weeks, not months." Marcus nodded slightly. The hegemony's confidence was both an asset and a liability. It had led them to reveal more information than they should have, but it also meant they were committed to a course of action that would be difficult to stop once it began. "Let them keep talking," he replied, his voice equally quiet. "The more they tell us, the better we can prepare our response." Through the cell's small window, Marcus could see stars wheeling slowly past as the battlecruiser maintained its patrol route. Somewhere out there, human colonies were going about their daily business, unaware that their peaceful existence was about to be shattered by forces they couldn't imagine. Farmers were tending their crops, children were playing in schoolyards, families were making plans for the future. In a few weeks, some of those colonies would be battlefields. Some of those families would be refugees. Some of those children would grow up in a galaxy shaped by war rather than peace. Unless someone stopped it first. Marcus closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to the briefing room where this mission had begun 3 months ago. Admiral Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, had laid out the intelligence reports with surgical precision. The hegemony was massing forces for a major offensive. Human colonies throughout the sector were at risk. Traditional diplomatic channels had failed, and military responses were being prepared, but intelligence gathering remained the top priority. "We need to know their plans, their capabilities, and their weaknesses," the Admiral had said, her voice carrying the weight of command authority earned through decades of service. "And we need someone who can get close enough to their command structure to gather that intelligence without triggering their defensive responses." The mission had seemed straightforward at the time. Infiltrate hegemony space using a cover identity, gather intelligence on their military preparations, and report back to human command before the offensive began. Simple in concept, complex in execution, and dependent on the kind of patience and attention to detail that Marcus had spent his career perfecting. Now, sitting in a hegemony holding cell while listening to their officers plan the conquest of human space, he realized that the mission parameters had changed. Intelligence gathering was no longer sufficient. Direct action was required, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. The soft hiss of the cell door opening interrupted his thoughts. A hegemony guard stood in the doorway, his weapon held with casual competence. Behind him, Commander Zarathal's voice could be heard giving orders to her bridge crew. "The human captain," the guard announced in accented standard. "The commander wishes to speak with you again." Marcus rose from his bunk with the careful movements of a man trying not to give offense. Whatever Zarathal wanted, it represented another opportunity to gather intelligence, another chance to assess the situation before making his final decision. As he was escorted back through the corridors of the battlecruiser, Marcus felt the familiar calm settling over him like an old friend. It was the calm that came before action, the stillness that preceded the storm. He had worn the mask of a merchant captain for 3 months, playing his role with perfect conviction. But underneath that mask was something else entirely. Something that Commander Zarathal and her crew were about to discover. The storm was coming, and, when it arrived, the galaxy would remember why humans were the only species with a concept called total war. The interrogation room was designed to intimidate. Harsh lighting cast sharp shadows across polished metal walls, while restrained fields hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus sat in the single chair, his hands resting calmly in his lap while hegemony officers moved around him like predators circling wounded prey. He had been in worse places, faced deadlier enemies, survived situations that would have broken lesser men. This was just another Tuesday in the life of someone who had learned long ago that survival depended on patience, observation, and the ability to strike at exactly the right moment. Commander Zarathal entered the room with the fluid grace of a born hunter, her forearms moving in complex patterns as she reviewed data on a portable display. Two of her senior officers flanked her, a scarred veteran whose cybernetic eye glowed with electronic malice, and a younger female whose bearing suggested intelligence work rather than line command. They took positions around the room with practiced efficiency, creating overlapping fields of observation that would make any escape attempt virtually impossible. For a normal prisoner. Captain Marcus Chen, Zarathal began, her translator rendering her words with mechanical precision, age 47, citizen of New Geneva Colony, licensed merchant captain for 12 years. Clean record, no military service, no political affiliations of note. The perfect example of human mediocrity. She set the display aside and leaned forward, her predatory gaze fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. Yet something about you troubles me, Captain. Your crew is too calm, your ship too well maintained for a struggling merchant operation, your navigation logs too precise for someone who claims to avoid military shipping lanes. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair, affecting the discomfort of a civilian caught in circumstances beyond his understanding. Commander, I don't know what you're looking for, but I'm just trying to make a living. If there's something specific you want to know about our cargo or our destination, I'm happy to cooperate. The scarred officer stepped forward, his cybernetic eye focusing on Marcus with mechanical precision. Cooperation would be wise, human. Our interrogation methods are quite effective, though not always pleasant for the subject. Now, Colonel Thax, Zarathal said with mock gentleness, let us not frighten our guest unnecessarily. I prefer to begin with civilized conversation before resorting to more persuasive techniques. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room with tactical data. Star charts showed the positions of human colonies throughout the sector, marked with different colors to indicate their strategic value and defensive capabilities. Trade routes were highlighted in blue, with notation showing cargo volumes and frequency of traffic. Military installations appeared as red dots, most of them small and scattered across vast distances of space. Tell me, Captain, she continued, what do you see when you look at this display? Marcus studied the hologram with the careful attention of a merchant captain trying to understand information beyond his expertise. In reality, he was memorizing every detail, cataloging intelligence that would be invaluable to human defense planners if he could find a way to transmit it. It looks like a map of the sector, he replied after a moment. Our usual trade routes are there, and some of the colonies we've visited. Though I have to say, some of this information looks more detailed than what we carry in our navigation computers. Indeed, the intelligence officer said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was softer than her colleagues, but carried an undertone of menace that was somehow more threatening than open hostility. We have been quite thorough in our reconnaissance. Every human world in this sector has been mapped, analyzed, and categorized according to its strategic value and defensive potential. She gestured toward a cluster of green dots near the center of the display. Agricultural worlds with minimal orbital defenses. They will surrender quickly when presented with overwhelming force. Another gesture highlighted industrial systems. Manufacturing centers that will be valuable once they are brought under hegemony control. Finally, she indicated the scattered red dots. Military installations that will require more aggressive tactics but pose no serious threat to our operational objectives. Marcus let his gaze linger on the military installations, noting their positions and the assessment markers that accompanied each one. The hegemony intelligence was good, but not perfect. They had identified the obvious military bases but missed several classified installations that appeared on their charts as civilian facilities. More importantly, they had completely failed to recognize the true nature of the human defensive strategy. Impressive intelligence gathering, he said with appropriate civilian amazement. Though I hope this doesn't mean you're planning some kind of military action. War would be terrible for trade. Colonel Thax laughed, a harsh sound like grinding metal. War, human, is the ultimate form of trade. We offer protection and order in exchange for submission and resources. Those who accept our generous terms prosper under hegemony rule. Those who refuse learn the futility of resistance. The pattern is quite consistent across the galaxy, Zarathul added, her tone suggesting she was discussing something as mundane as shipping schedules.
First comes reconnaissance, then diplomatic contact, then the presentation of terms. Most civilizations accept the inevitable at this stage, recognizing that submission is preferable to destruction. Those few who choose to resist are crushed quickly and, decisively, serving as examples to others who might contemplate defiance. She manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on specific human colonies. Your species presents some unique challenges, I admit. The scattered nature of human settlements makes conventional conquest more complex than usual. We cannot simply seize your homeworld and demand surrender from satellite colonies, because you have no true homeworld. No central government with the authority to negotiate on behalf of all human settlements.
We like our independence, Marcus replied mildly.
Always have. Each colony tends to handle its own affairs.
Yes, we have noticed this tendency, the intelligence officer said dryly. It complicates the diplomatic process but simplifies the military one. We will deal with each colony individually, starting with the most strategically valuable and working our way down the list. Those who surrender immediately will be treated with appropriate mercy. Those who resist will serve as object lessons for the others. Marcus felt the familiar cold anger beginning to build in his chest, the controlled fury that came from listening to predators discuss their plans to slaughter innocents. He kept his expression carefully neutral, but inside he was making calculations, preparing for the moment when the merchant captain's mask would come off and something far more dangerous would be revealed. How many colonies are we talking about? He asked with apparent casual interest. In this sector alone, 47 inhabited systems with significant human populations, Zarathul replied, clearly enjoying the opportunity to display the thoroughness of her intelligence gathering. Ranging from major industrial centers with populations in the hundreds of millions to frontier settlements barely large enough to qualify for colonial status. All of them will be brought under hegemony control within the next 6 months.
6 months. Marcus filed the timeline away for future reference, along with everything else he was learning about hegemony operational planning. The scope of their intended offensive was larger than human intelligence had estimated, but the timeline was also longer than feared. That suggested they were planning a methodical campaign rather than a lightning strike, which created opportunities for defense and counterattack. 6 months seems like a very tight schedule, he observed. That's a lot of territory to cover.
Organization and superior technology make the impossible routine, Colonel Thex stated with mechanical precision. Each phase of the operation has been planned down to the smallest detail. Forward bases are already being established, supply lines are secured, and fleet deployments are proceeding according to schedule. The intelligence officer activated another section of the display, showing hegemony fleet positions throughout the region. Marcus counted battleships, carriers, support vessels, and troop transports, enough firepower to overwhelm any single human colony, but spread thin across the vast distances of interstellar space. The hegemony was indeed well prepared, but they were also committed to a strategy that assumed human defensive responses would follow conventional patterns.
Another mistake. Tell me, Captain, Zarathul said, leaning back in her chair, what do you know about human military doctrine?
The question was designed to sound casual, but Marcus could hear the underlying tension. This was the real purpose of the interrogation, not to extract information about cargo manifests or trade routes, but to probe the limits of civilian knowledge about military matters.
The hegemony wanted to know how much ordinary humans understood about their own defensive capabilities.
Not much, Marcus replied with a slight shrug. I know we have patrol ships and some orbital defense platforms, but military matters are way above my pay grade. I leave that stuff to the professionals and focus on moving cargo.
How refreshingly honest, the intelligence officer murmured.
Most species we encounter try to exaggerate their military capabilities in the hope of deterring attack.
Humans seem remarkably willing to acknowledge their limitations. Why pretend to be something we're not? Marcus asked with apparent sincerity. If someone wants to cause trouble, they're going to do it regardless of what we say.
Better to be honest about our capabilities and try to find peaceful solutions. The three hegemony officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of human psychology. They saw weakness where there was strategy, simplicity where there was subtlety, resignation where there was preparation. Every word Marcus spoke reinforced their preconceptions about human nature, making them more confident in their planned offensive.
Perfect.
Your attitude is quite typical, Zarathul observed. Human colonies consistently underestimate the scope of the threat they face and overestimate their ability to negotiate peaceful solutions. This makes our task considerably easier. She stood and moved to the holographic display, her forearms gesturing toward different sections with practiced authority. Observe the defensive positions your military has established throughout this sector.
Patrol routes designed to provide early warning of enemy approach.
Orbital platforms positioned to defend major population centers. Supply depots located at strategic intervals along likely invasion corridors. Marcus studied the display with careful attention, noting not just the positions the hegemony had identified, but also the ones they had missed. Human defensive planning was more sophisticated than it appeared on the surface, built around concepts that predatory species like the Kethmori had difficulty comprehending. "It looks pretty thorough to me," he said after a moment. "Though I suppose military experts would see weaknesses that aren't obvious to civilians." "Indeed they would," Colonel Fex replied with mechanical satisfaction.
"Your defensive positions are textbook examples of static thinking.
Fixed installations that can be bypassed or overwhelmed, patrol routes that can be avoided or ambushed, supply lines that can be severed to starve entire sectors of resources." The intelligence officer manipulated the display to show projected attack routes in red, flowing around human defensive positions like water around stones. Classic military doctrine teaches that fixed defenses are ultimately futile against a mobile attacker with superior numbers. Your strategists have apparently learned nothing from galactic history.
Marcus nodded as if accepting this assessment, while internally cataloging every detail of the hegemony's planned approach vectors.
They were indeed following classic military doctrine, which made their strategy predictable to anyone who understood the true nature of human defensive planning. The hegemony saw static defenses where there was actually a dynamic network, fixed positions where there was actually flexible response capability. They were walking into a trap, and they were too confident to realize it. "I suppose our military leaders know what they're doing," he said with apparent resignation.
"Though I hope it doesn't come to fighting.
War never solved anything, and innocent people always get hurt."
"War solves everything," Zarathul corrected him with casual certainty.
"It determines who rules and who serves, who prospers and who suffers, who shapes the future and who merely endures it. Your species' reluctance to embrace this fundamental truth is the source of your strategic weakness." She deactivated the holographic display and turned her full attention back to Marcus, her predatory gaze searching for any sign that he was more than he appeared to be. "However, I find myself curious about certain aspects of your background, Captain Chen. Your navigation logs show remarkable precision for someone with no military training. Your ship's maintenance records suggest access to spare parts that are difficult to obtain in civilian markets. Your crew displays a level of discipline unusual for merchant sailors." The moment Marcus had been waiting for had finally arrived. The hegemony's intelligence was better than he had hoped, but not quite good enough to see through his cover identity completely. They suspected something, but they weren't sure what. This was the critical juncture where his mission would either continue or transform into something entirely different. "Commander," he said with carefully calibrated concern, "I don't know what you're implying, but I can assure you that everything about our operation is completely legitimate. If there are questions about our documentation or procedures, I'm happy to provide whatever additional information you need." Colonel Fex stepped forward, his cybernetic eye focusing on Marcus with mechanical intensity. Perhaps more aggressive interrogation techniques would yield better results. Humans are known to be surprisingly resilient under pressure, but everyone has their breaking point. "Patience, Colonel," Zarathul replied, though her expression suggested she was considering the suggestion. "Captain Chen has been most cooperative so far. Let us see how cooperative he remains when the stakes are raised." She activated her personal communicator and spoke briefly in Kethmori. Moments later, the interrogation room door hissed open to admit two guards escorting Dr. Sarah Kim. The doctor's hands were bound behind her back, but her expression remained calm and professional despite her circumstances. "Your ship's medical officer,"
the intelligence officer explained as Dr. Kim was pushed into view. Dr. Sarah Kim, according to your crew manifest. Licensed physician with a specialty in trauma surgery. Quite well qualified for a simple merchant vessel, wouldn't you say?
Marcus felt his carefully controlled expression tighten slightly, just enough to suggest concern for a crew member, not enough to indicate that she was anything more than a colleague and friend. Inside, he was calculating distances and angles, assessing the positions of guards and weapons, preparing for the possibility that the situation was about to escalate beyond the point of no return. Sarah is the best doctor we could afford, he replied carefully. Medical emergencies can happen anywhere, and good medical care is worth the extra expense. Indeed, Zarathul murmured, her forearms moving in patterns that suggested growing suspicion. A trauma surgeon on a merchant vessel. How very prudent. Tell me, doctor, what sort of medical emergencies does one typically encounter in merchant operations? Dr. Kim straightened despite her restraints, meeting the commander's gaze with professional composure. Industrial accidents, mostly. Cargo loading injuries, system malfunctions, the occasional appendicitis. Nothing exotic, just the sort of problems that arise when you're weeks away from the nearest medical facility. Of course, the intelligence officer said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Though your medical supplies suggest preparation for rather more serious trauma than one would expect from industrial accidents. Combat drugs, advanced surgical equipment, prosthetic limbs rated for combat applications. The trap was closing. Marcus could see it in the way the guards had positioned themselves, the subtle tension in the officers' postures, the predatory gleam in Zarathul's eyes. His cover was holding, but barely. One wrong answer, one suspicious reaction, and the situation would explode into violence. Time to make a decision. Dr. Kim is very thorough in her preparations, he said with calm conviction. When you're responsible for people's lives, you don't take chances with medical supplies. Zarathul studied him for a long moment, her predatory instincts clearly sensing something beneath the surface but unable to identify exactly what. Around the room, the other officers were tense and ready, weapons within easy reach but not yet drawn. Captain Chen, she said finally, I believe you are not telling me the complete truth. Your ship, your crew, your background, all of it suggests something more than a simple merchant operation. The question is, what are you really doing in my space? Marcus met her gaze with the steady calm of a man who had nothing to hide and everything to protect. Commander, I've been completely honest with you. We're merchants trying to make a living in dangerous times. If that troubles you, then, I suppose there's nothing more I can say. The silence stretched between them like a drawn blade, pregnant with possibilities and consequences. In that moment, Marcus felt the familiar transformation beginning, the shedding of one identity and the assumption of another, the discarding of the mask he had worn for 3 months in favor of something far more dangerous. The hegemony had pushed hard enough to glimpse what lay beneath the surface. Now they were about to discover that some humans were exactly what they appeared to be. And others were something else entirely. Very well, Captain, Zarathul said with deadly quiet. Since you insist on maintaining this charade, let us see how long your resolve lasts when the consequences become more personal. She gestured to Colonel Thex, who stepped forward with mechanical precision. Begin with the doctor. I find that humans are remarkably protective of their companions. Perhaps witnessing her discomfort will encourage greater honesty. The moment had arrived. The point of no return had been reached, and Marcus Chen, merchant captain, was about to disappear forever. What emerged in his place would remind the hegemony why humans were the only species in the galaxy that considered genocide a failure of imagination rather than the ultimate deterrent. Colonel Thex reached for Dr. Kim with mechanical precision, his cybernetic hand extending toward her arm with the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to inflicting pain without consequence. The motion was smooth, practiced, efficient, the movement of a professional who had broken thousands of prisoners in interrogation rooms exactly like this one. His hand never made contact. Marcus moved with a fluidity that seemed to bend the laws of physics, rising from his chair and crossing the intervening distance in a single flowing motion that transformed him from seated prisoner to active threat before any of the hegemony officers could react. His left hand intercepted Thex's reaching arm, fingers finding pressure points with surgical precision, while his right hand struck the colonel's throat with enough force to crush his larynx. The cybernetic eye went dark as Thex collapsed, his enhanced physiology no match for techniques that had been perfected in wars the hegemony had never heard of. The entire interaction took less than 3 seconds, and, in that brief span of time, the merchant captain named Marcus Chen ceased to exist. What stood in his place was something else entirely. Commander Zarathal's forearms moved with predatory speed, reaching for weapons that should have given her an overwhelming advantage against an unarmed human. She was fast, efficient, and deadly, a product of evolution that had turned her species into apex predators on a world where only the strongest survived. She wasn't fast enough. Marcus flowed around her first strike like water around stone, his body moving with a precision that spoke of decades of training in arts that most species had never imagined. His hand found her primary weapon arm, applying pressure that sent the disruptor spinning away across the floor. His knee found her midsection with enough force to double her over, while his elbow struck the base of her skull with clinical accuracy. The intelligence officer was drawing her sidearm when Marcus reached her, his movement a blur of controlled violence that ended with her unconscious on the floor beside her commander. The 2 guards who had been flanking the door were reaching for their weapons when he turned his attention to them, but weapons required time to aim and fire, and time was something they no longer possessed. The first guard managed to clear his holster before Marcus reached him. The disruptor clattered to the floor a moment later, followed by its owner. The second guard actually managed to fire a shot, the energy beam scorching the wall where Marcus had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. The return stroke caught the guard in the solar plexus, and he joined his colleagues in unconsciousness. The entire engagement had taken less than 30 seconds. 5 trained hegemony soldiers, armed and armored, had been neutralized by an unarmed human in the span of time it might take to order coffee. The interrogation room was silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional groan from the unconscious officers. Dr. Kim looked at Marcus with professional assessment rather than surprise, her medical training automatically cataloging the precise application of force that had rendered their captors unconscious without permanent damage. "Clean work," she observed calmly. "Though I think our cover is officially blown." Marcus was already moving, his hands working efficiently to free her restraints while his mind processed the tactical situation. The interrogation room was located deep within the ship's security section, surrounded by multiple layers of defensive systems. Alarms would be triggered within minutes when the guards failed to report in. They had a narrow window of opportunity before the entire ship was mobilized against them. "Cover was always temporary," he replied, his voice carrying none of the merchant captain's careful deference. This was a different voice, harder, more confident, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions under extreme pressure. "The question now is how much damage we can do before they stop us." He moved to Commander Zarathal's unconscious form, his hands working swiftly to access her command codes and security clearances. The hegemony's reliance on biological identification systems was about to become a serious liability. Within moments, he had downloaded the contents of her personal command files, along with tactical data that would be invaluable to human defense planners. "Marcus," Dr. Kim said urgently, "we need to move. This ship carries a crew of over 3,000, and they're all going to be looking for us once the alarm sounds." "Not Marcus," he replied without looking up from his work. "That identity died the moment I decided to drop the act. Call me Ghost." Ghost. The codename carried weight in certain circles, associated with operations that officially never happened and objectives that were achieved through methods that polite society preferred not to discuss. Dr. Kim had known the merchant captain was a cover identity, but she was only now beginning to understand exactly what lay beneath that carefully constructed facade. "Ghost it is," she said, accepting the revelation with the calm professionalism that had marked her as suitable for this mission in the first place. "What's the plan?" "We have 2 objectives," Ghost replied, finishing his download of the commander's files. "First, transmit everything we've learned about hegemony operational planning to human command. Second, ensure that this ship and its crew can't participate in the planned offensive against human colonies." Dr. Kim's expression hardened as the implications became clear. "Define ensure, please." Ghost looked up from the unconscious commander, his eyes reflecting a cold calculation that had nothing to do with mercy or proportional response. "This battlecruiser represents approximately 15% of the hegemony's assault capability in this sector. Its destruction would force them to delay their offensive by at least 3 months, possibly longer.
That delay would give human colonies time to prepare defensive measures and request reinforcements. 3,000 crew members, Ghost. That's a lot of lives. 47 human colonies, Sarah. Hundreds of millions of lives. He stood, sliding the downloaded data into a secure storage device. I didn't want it to come to this, but the hegemony made the choice when they decided to target civilian populations. We're just responding appropriately. The cold logic was undeniable, even if the moral implications were staggering. Dr. Kim had signed up for intelligence gathering, not mass casualties, but she had also taken an oath to protect human lives by whatever means necessary. Sometimes those means required making choices that would haunt you forever. How do we destroy a battlecruiser from the inside? She asked, accepting the mission parameters with professional calm. Engineering section, Ghost replied, moving toward the interrogation room door. Every ship has vulnerabilities if you know where to look. The hegemony builds for overwhelming firepower, but they sacrifice redundancy for efficiency. Take out the primary reactor containment, and the ship becomes a miniature star for about 12 seconds. He paused at the door, listening for sounds of activity in the corridor beyond. The ship's routine operations continued normally, which meant the alarm hadn't been raised yet. They still had time to move before the entire crew was mobilized against them. We need to reach our crew first, Dr. Kim pointed out. Elena and Tom are still in the holding cells, and we're going to need their expertise if we want to pull this off. Ghost nodded, already plotting routes through the ship's layout that would minimize their exposure to security checkpoints and patrol routes. The hegemony's confidence in their own security would work in their favor. No one expected prisoners to escape from maximum security cells, much less pose a threat to the ship itself. Elena first, he decided. We'll need communications access to transmit our intelligence data, and she's the best at improvising solutions with unfamiliar equipment. Tom can wait until we're ready to move against the engineering section. The corridor outside the interrogation room was dimly lit and empty, designed more for functionality than comfort. Emergency lighting strips provided just enough illumination to navigate, while sensor clusters monitored for unauthorized movement. Ghost moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned long ago how to become invisible in plain sight, his body language and posture shifting to match the expected behavior patterns of authorized personnel. Dr. Kim followed his lead, drawing on training that had prepared her for exactly this sort of situation. The medical officer persona she had worn for 3 months was just as much a constructed identity as Ghost's merchant captain role. Underneath the professional healer was someone who had seen enough combat to understand the difference between treatment and triage, between saving lives and ending threats. They moved through the ship's corridors with purposeful efficiency, avoiding main thoroughfares while navigating toward the security section where their crew was being held. Ghost's downloaded intelligence included deck plans and security protocols, giving them a significant advantage in planning their route. The hegemony's systematic approach to ship design made their vessel easy to navigate once you understood the underlying patterns. Contact ahead, Dr. Kim whispered as they approached a junction between corridors. Ghost pressed against the wall, extending his awareness through training that had taught him to perceive threats before they became obvious. 2 crew members were approaching from the perpendicular corridor, routine patrol, not an active search. They would pass the junction in approximately 30 seconds, continuing on their assigned route without deviation. Unless something made them deviate. Ghost waited until the patrol was directly at the junction, then stepped into view with the casual confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. His body language and posture conveyed authorized presence, while his stolen security codes would satisfy any casual scanning of his identification. Officers, he said with appropriate deference, Commander Zarathal requests immediate status reports from all section chiefs. Priority Alpha authorization. The 2 hegemony crew members exchanged glances, their predatory instincts clearly sensing something unusual but unable to identify exactly what. Ghost's appearance was wrong. He was human, not Kathmori, but his manner and authority codes were correct, and their species' hierarchical nature made questioning direct orders psychologically difficult. Status reports, one of them replied uncertainly. We weren't notified of any priority alerts. The notification is being transmitted now, Ghost replied with patient authority. Internal security matter. The commander wants all department heads to report to their stations immediately for briefing.
It was a calculated risk. The hegemony's command structure was rigid enough that direct orders from superior officers were rarely questioned, but flexible enough that emergency situations could alter normal protocols. Ghost was betting that their natural deference to authority would override their suspicion of unusual circumstances. The bet paid off. Understood, the second crew member said with mechanical precision. We will report to our section chief immediately. They continued down the corridor, their patrol route forgotten in favor of following what they believed to be direct orders from their commanding officer. Ghost and Dr. Kim waited until they were out of sight, then continued toward their objective with increased urgency. The deception would only last until someone attempted to verify the orders, and hegemony communication systems were efficient enough to make that verification very quick. The holding cells were located in a heavily secured section of the ship, protected by multiple layers of electronic and physical barriers. Under normal circumstances, reaching imprisoned crew members would require authorization codes, biometric identification, and escort by security personnel. Ghost had authorization codes stolen from the unconscious commander, but biometric identification remained a problem. Fortunately, normal circumstances no longer applied. The security checkpoint was staffed by a single guard whose attention was focused on monitoring displays rather than watching for unauthorized approach. His first indication that something was wrong came when Ghost's hand closed over his mouth, cutting off any possibility of raising an alarm. The subsequent pressure to his carotid artery rendered him unconscious in seconds, leaving the checkpoint unmanned and accessible. Dr. Kim worked quickly to access the detention control systems while Ghost maintained security watch. The hegemony's technology was sophisticated but not impenetrable. Every system had weaknesses if you knew where to look and had the skills to exploit them. Within minutes, she had identified the correct holding cells and initiated the release sequence. Elena Vasquez emerged from her cell with the controlled alertness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Communications officer was another carefully constructed identity, hiding someone whose real expertise involved electronic warfare and information systems penetration. She took in the situation with a single glance, processing the implications of their changed status with professional calm. I take it the diplomatic approach didn't work out, she asked dryly. Diplomacy was never really an option, Ghost replied, handing her the downloaded intelligence data. We need to get this information to human command, then make sure this ship can't participate in their planned offensive. Elena accepted the data storage device with hands that were steady despite their circumstances. Transmission might be tricky. Hegemony communication systems use quantum encryption with rotating cipher keys. I'll need access to their primary communication array, and even then, it might take time to break their security protocols. How much time? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if their encryption is more sophisticated than I expect. Ghost calculated rapidly. 20 to 30 minutes was longer than they could realistically expect to remain undetected, but it was also the minimum time required to ensure their intelligence reached human command. The mission parameters were clear: intelligence transmission took priority over personal survival, but destroying the ship would be meaningless if human forces weren't warned about the planned offensive. Do it, he decided. Sarah and I will retrieve Tom and prepare for the engineering objective. We'll coordinate timing so that your transmission completes before we initiate reactor destabilization. Understood, Elena replied, already mentally preparing for the technical challenges ahead. I'll need 15 minutes to reach the communication array and establish access, then another 15 to 20 for encryption breaking and data transmission. Give me 35 minutes from right now. Ghost nodded, checking the chronometer on his stolen security device. 35 minutes until Elena's transmission was complete, then whatever time they could buy for reaching and sabotaging the engineering section. It was going to be tight, but the mission was still achievable if they moved fast and avoided major complications. Of course, missions like this always involved major complications. The alarm that began sounding throughout the ship indicated that their window of opportunity was closing faster than anticipated. Someone had discovered the unconscious officers in the interrogation room, or noticed the missing guard from the security checkpoint, or simply tried to contact personnel who were no longer able to respond. Whatever the trigger, the entire ship was now mobilizing against them. Change of plans, Ghost said as emergency lighting bathed the corridors in harsh red illumination.
Elena, you have 20 minutes maximum before this ship becomes completely locked down.
Get to that communication array and transmit everything, even if you have to send it in clear text. Understood, she replied, disappearing into the maze of corridors with the fluid grace of someone who had learned long ago how to become invisible when survival depended on it. Ghost and Dr. Kim moved toward Tom Rodriguez's cell as the ship around them transformed from routine patrol vessel to active combat zone. Blast doors were sealing throughout the ship, dividing it into defensive compartments that would make movement increasingly difficult. Security teams were mobilizing with weapons and equipment designed to deal with armed intruders. The hunt was beginning in earnest. Tom emerged from his cell with the calm professionalism of someone who had been expecting this moment for months. Chief Engineer was his cover identity, but his real expertise involved demolitions and sabotage skills that were about to become critically important. I heard the alarms, he said without preamble.
Are we doing what I think we're doing? Engineering section, Ghost confirmed. Reactor destabilization. How long do you need? Tom's expression shifted to the cold calculation of someone mentally reviewing complex technical procedures. Depends on their safety systems and redundancy protocols. Hegemony reactors are built for efficiency rather than fail-safe operation, which makes them vulnerable to cascade failures if you know the right pressure points. Give me 10 minutes with their control systems, and I can turn this ship into the shortest-lived star in galactic history. You'll have 10 minutes, Ghost promised, though he had no idea how they were going to fight their way through an entire ship's crew to reach the engineering section. Sarah, what's our medical situation? Dr. Kim checked her supplies with practiced efficiency. Standard combat medical kit, plus some specialized items that aren't exactly regulation. I can keep us operational through moderate injuries, but if we take serious damage, our options become limited. The sound of armored footsteps echoed through the corridors as security teams began their systematic search. Heavy boots, multiple personnel, coordinated movement patterns, the hegemony was deploying serious resources to recapture their escaped prisoners. They clearly understood that something more significant than a simple escape attempt was underway. Time to move, Ghost said, shouldering his share of equipment while mentally reviewing the route to the engineering section. Stay close, stay quiet, and remember that we're not trying to win a war here. We just need to survive long enough to complete the mission. As they moved deeper into the ship, past blast doors that were sealing behind them and through corridors that were filling with armed enemies, Ghost felt the familiar calm settling over him like an old friend. The merchant captain's mask was gone forever, discarded in favor of something that the hegemony was about to learn to fear. They had called him just a human and dismissed him as inconsequential. They were about to discover that humans had a word for what happened when you underestimated them. They called it regret. The engineering section of the Hegemony battlecruiser was a cathedral of controlled destruction. Massive conduits carried power from the primary reactor to weapons systems capable of cracking planets, while backup generators hummed with the potential energy of a small star. The air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained force, and the constant low-frequency pulse of the reactor core provided a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Ghost, Dr. Kim, and Tom Rodriguez crouched in a maintenance shaft 50 meters above the main engineering floor, studying the target area through optical enhancement devices that revealed every detail of their destination. Below them, Hegemony crew members moved with the efficient urgency of professionals responding to a security alert. Emergency protocols were in full effect, with additional personnel manning critical systems and security teams positioned at all major access points. 12 guards on the main floor, plus 6 more at secondary control stations, Ghost reported in a voice barely above a whisper. Engineering crew of approximately 30, all of them armed with emergency sidearms. Response time from security reinforcements is estimated at 3 minutes once the alarm is raised. Tom studied the reactor control systems through his scope, his demolitions expertise automatically cataloging access points and vulnerabilities. Good news and bad news, he said quietly. Good news is that Hegemony reactors are designed for maximum efficiency with minimal safety redundancy. Bad news is that they've got the control systems locked down tight, biometric access, quantum encryption, the works. I'll need physical access to the primary control console, and that means getting past all those guards. Dr. Kim checked her medical supplies one final time, ensuring that emergency stimulants and combat drugs were readily accessible. How long will you need once you reach the console?
7 minutes for a clean shutdown that leads to cascade failure, Tom replied.
3 minutes for an emergency overload that turns us all into plasma. Given our timeline constraints, I'm leaning toward option 2.
Ghost nodded grimly. 3 minutes was achievable if they could neutralize the engineering crew quickly enough, but it also meant no margin for error and no possibility of retreat once they committed to the attack. Elena's transmission window was already half gone, and every second they delayed reduced the chances that human command would receive their intelligence before the hegemony offensive began.
Movement pattern suggests shift change in approximately 8 minutes, he observed, watching the engineering crew through his scope. Half the current personnel will be replaced by fresh crew, which means a brief period of reduced alertness as people transition between shifts. 8 minutes puts us right at Elena's transmission deadline, Dr. Kim pointed out.
If we wait for optimal conditions down there, we might miss our window for getting the intelligence data out.
It was the classic military dilemma: perfect timing versus acceptable risk.
Wait for ideal conditions and potentially sacrifice the primary objective, or accept suboptimal circumstances and potentially sacrifice the entire team. Ghost had faced this choice countless times before, and the answer was always the same: mission first, personal survival second.
We go now, he decided. Elena's transmission takes priority over everything else, including our own survival. Tom, can you work with current conditions down there?
Tom's expression shifted to the cold professionalism of someone who had learned long ago to separate emotion from technical requirements. I can work with anything as long as you keep them off me for 3 minutes. Just make sure you're not standing too close when the reactor decides to have its temper tantrum. Ghost was already moving, his body flowing through the maintenance shaft with practiced silence. The route to the engineering floor would take them past multiple security checkpoints and through corridors that were actively patrolled, but stealth was no longer an option. Speed and violence were their only remaining assets, and both would have to be applied with surgical precision if they wanted to complete their mission. The first guard never saw them coming. Ghost dropped from an access hatch directly behind the sentry post, his hands finding throat and carotid with lethal efficiency. The guard collapsed without a sound, his weapon clattering briefly against the deck before being caught by Dr. Kim's steady hands. Contact in 90 seconds, she whispered, monitoring the patrol schedule they had observed from above. 2 guards, standard sweep pattern, approaching from Section 7. Ghost positioned himself at the corner where the patrol would emerge, while Tom moved toward the secondary access point that would give him the most direct route to the reactor controls. Dr. Kim took over watch position with the captured weapon, her medical training providing surprising competence with small arms, a skill set that raised questions about her background that this probably wasn't the time to explore. The 2-guard patrol emerged precisely on schedule, their attention focused on their assigned sectors rather than watching for threats that should have been impossible given the ship's security measures. Ghost's first strike took down the lead guard before his partner could react, while his follow-up attack neutralized the second threat with clinical efficiency. Both guards were unconscious and disarmed within 5 seconds, leaving the corridor clear for Tom's advance. Moving now, Tom reported, disappearing into the maze of conduits and control systems that surrounded the primary reactor. His demolitions expertise guided him through the complex maze of technology, identifying the critical points where a small application of force could trigger catastrophic failure throughout the entire system. Ghost and Dr. Kim established defensive positions at the 2 main access points to the engineering section, their captured weapons providing limited but necessary firepower against the security response that would inevitably arrive. The ship's internal sensors would have detected the unconscious guards within minutes, triggering alerts that would bring overwhelming force to bear on their position. Elena, status report. Ghost spoke into his communication device, hoping that their teammate had managed to establish contact with human command despite the increasing security lockdown throughout the ship. Transmission in progress, came the tense reply. Hegemony encryption is tougher than expected, but I'm breaking through layer by layer.
Give me 3 more minutes for complete data transfer. 3 minutes.
The same timeline Tom needed for reactor destabilization, assuming he could reach the control systems without interference. Ghost calculated rapidly they could hold their current position against light security response, but heavy assault teams would overwhelm them quickly. Everything depended on timing and the hope that the hegemony's confidence in their own security had made them slower to respond than they should have been.
The hope lasted exactly 90 seconds. The first assault team appeared at the main corridor intersection with tactical precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. 6 soldiers in full battle armor, armed with weapons designed to penetrate ship hulls, moving with the coordinated efficiency of professionals who had performed similar operations countless times before. They established overlapping fields of fire and began advancing with textbook precision. Ghost's first shot took down the lead soldier, his captured weapon proving more effective than expected against hegemony armor. Dr. Kim's medical training translated into surprisingly accurate marksmanship, her shots finding gaps in armor plating with surgical precision. But 6 against 2 were poor odds, made worse by the certainty that reinforcements were already on the way.
"Tom, how's that reactor coming?"
Ghost called while changing position to avoid return fire that scored the bulkhead where he had been standing moments earlier. "Control access achieved," came the reply from somewhere deep in the reactor housing.
"Beginning destabilization sequence now."
"Fair warning, once I start this process, we have approximately 4 minutes before this ship becomes a very brief light show."
For minutes to complete Elena's transmission, fight their way out of the engineering section, and reach escape pods that might or might not be functional.
The mathematics were challenging but not impossible, assuming they could maintain their current defensive position against increasingly heavy assault.
The assumption proved optimistic. The second assault team arrived with heavier weapons and tactical support equipment that transformed the engagement from skirmish to siege.
Plasma charges began melting through bulkheads, creating new lines of attack that bypassed Ghost and Dr. Kim's defensive positions. Gravity manipulation devices altered the local environment, making movement difficult and accurate fire nearly impossible. Position compromised, Dr. Kim reported as a plasma charge opened a hole in the wall directly beside her cover position.
"They're flanking us through multiple vectors. We can't hold this position much longer."
Ghost assessed their tactical situation with the cold calculation of someone who had survived impossible circumstances by accepting reality without flinching. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a section of the ship that was rapidly being surrounded by overwhelming force.
Traditional military doctrine would recommend immediate withdrawal to a more defensible position. Traditional military doctrine also assumed you were fighting for territory rather than time.
"Sarah, fall back to Tom's position," he ordered while laying down covering fire that forced the assault teams to take cover.
"Establish defensive perimeter around the reactor controls."
"I'll buy you as much time as possible."
"Ghost, that's suicide," she protested while moving toward the reactor housing. "You can't hold them off alone."
"I don't need to hold them off," he replied with grim satisfaction. "I just need to slow them down for 3 more minutes.
Tom's reactor destabilization will do the rest."
As if summoned by his words, the ship's emergency alarms shifted to a new pattern, the distinctive warning that indicated reactor instability and potential core breach. Throughout the engineering section, automated systems began emergency shutdown procedures while crew members moved with the desperate efficiency of people who understood exactly what those alarms meant.
"Destabilization sequence active," Tom reported from his position deep within the reactor housing. "Cascade failure is now inevitable.
We have 3 minutes and 40 seconds before containment breach, after which this becomes somebody else's problem." Ghost smiled grimly as he maintained his defensive position against the advancing assault teams.
3 minutes and 40 seconds was more time than he had dared hope for, and Elena's transmission should be completing within the next 60 seconds.
The mission was actually going to succeed, despite circumstances that had seemed impossible just minutes earlier. "Elena, final status report," he called into his communication device while dodging plasma fire that turned the bulkhead behind him into molten metal.
"Transmission complete," came the jubilant reply.
"All intelligence data successfully transferred to human command, including complete hegemony battle plans and fleet positions. They'll have everything they need to prepare defensive measures."
Success. The primary mission objective was achieved, which meant everything else was secondary.
Ghost felt the familiar calm settling over him as the situation shifted from desperate survival to controlled conclusion. They had accomplished what they came to do, now it was just a matter of managing the endgame with as much style as circumstances allowed. "Tom, Sarah, time to go," he called while maintaining covering fire against the assault teams. "Head for escape pods, best speed."
"I'll be right behind you."
He wasn't going to be right behind them, and they all knew it.
Someone had to hold the line long enough for his teammates to reach potential escape routes, and Ghost was the logical choice for that final stand. Dr. Kim's medical expertise might be needed if anyone survived the next few minutes, while Tom's technical knowledge could prove valuable for actually operating escape pod systems that were designed for alien physiology.
Ghost, Dr.
Kim called from her new position near the reactor controls. There might be another option. She was pointing toward a maintenance shaft that connected to the ship's central transit system, a route that could potentially take them to escape pod clusters without fighting through the security teams that were converging on their current position. It was a slim chance, but better than the certainty of dying in a heroic last stand.
Go, he ordered without hesitation. Both of you.
I'll maintain this position until you're clear, then follow if possible. Tom disappeared into the maintenance shaft with practiced efficiency, while Dr. Kim lingered just long enough to provide medical stimulants that would keep Ghost operational despite accumulating fatigue and minor injuries. Then, she was gone as well, leaving him alone with an advancing army and a reactor that was counting down toward spectacular failure.
3 minutes and 10 seconds.
Ghost settled into his final defensive position with the serene calm of someone who had always known it would end something like this. The merchant captain's mask was long gone, discarded in favor of something that the galaxy's predators were finally beginning to understand. He was human, but not the kind of human that Commander Zara Thal had expected to encounter. He was the kind that made entire civilizations wake up screaming. The assault teams began their final advance with overwhelming force, confident that their numerical superiority and heavy weapons would crush any remaining resistance. They moved with tactical precision through corridors that were filling with radiation alarms and emergency lighting, past blast doors that were sealing automatically in response to reactor instability. They had no idea that the quiet human they were hunting had been designed by evolution and trained by experience to turn impossible odds into Pyrrhic victories for anyone foolish enough to corner him.
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Ghost opened fire with mechanical precision, each shot placed with surgical accuracy to maximize damage while conserving ammunition. His position gave him excellent fields of fire down multiple corridors, while his stolen weapons provided enough firepower to make the assault teams pay dearly for every meter of advance. But there were too many of them, and they had learned to respect his capabilities. Plasma charges began opening new routes through bulkheads, while gravity manipulation devices made his defensive position increasingly untenable.
It was time for the final gambit. 1 minute and 40 seconds.
Ghost abandoned his defensive position and began moving through the engineering section with predatory grace, turning from defender to hunter in the span of a heartbeat. The assault teams found themselves facing an enemy who refused to hold ground, who struck from unexpected angles before disappearing into the maze of machinery and conduits that filled the reactor housing. He had become the thing that soldiers throughout the galaxy learned to fear in their nightmares, a human who had decided that survival was less important than making the enemy pay an unacceptable price for victory.
30 seconds. The ship's final alarms began sounding as reactor containment moved beyond the point of no return.
Emergency evacuation protocols activated throughout the vessel, with crew members abandoning their posts in favor of escape pods and emergency shuttles. In the engineering section, automated systems began their final shutdown sequences while radiation levels climbed toward lethal parameters. Ghost found himself alone among the machinery that was about to become the heart of a miniature star. The assault teams had withdrawn to minimum safe distance, recognizing that their quarry was no longer worth pursuing given the circumstances. He had won, in the sense that warriors win when they accomplish their mission despite impossible odds.
10 seconds.
He thought about the human colonies that would now have warning of the hegemony offensive, the defensive preparations that would save millions of lives, the strategic advantage that their sacrifice had purchased for humanity's ongoing survival in a hostile galaxy.
5 seconds.
He thought about Elena and Tom and Sarah, hopefully safe in escape pods that would carry them far enough away to survive the coming explosion. They would return to human space with intelligence that would reshape the entire strategic situation in this sector.
3 seconds.
He thought about Commander Zarathal's dismissive comment about humans and their supposed limitations, and smiled grimly at the lesson she was about to receive about the dangers of underestimating prey that had evolved into apex predators.
1 second.
The reactor containment failed with the fury of a newborn star, and the hegemony battlecruiser ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. The explosion was visible from several light-years away, a brief flare of light that marked the end of 15% of the enemy's assault capability in this sector. 3 escape pods ejected from the dying ship in the final seconds before containment failure, their emergency beacons broadcasting distress signals that would eventually be picked up by human patrol ships. The pods contained a communications officer, a demolitions expert, and a doctor, 3 people whose cover identities as merchant crew had hidden skills that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The 4th pod that should have contained their captain remained docked, its occupant having made a choice that warriors throughout history would recognize and respect. Ghost had kept his promise to hold the line until his team was clear. And, in doing so, he had reminded the galaxy why humans were the only species that considered acceptable losses to be a starting point for planning rather than a limit on ambition. Admiral Saracen stood before the holographic display in the Joint Operations Center, watching as tactical data from across 12 sectors painted a picture that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The intelligence gathered by Ghost and his team had transformed the strategic landscape so completely that even veteran strategists were struggling to adapt to the new reality. Where hegemony planners had expected to find scattered human colonies with minimal defenses, they instead discovered coordinated defensive networks that had been preparing for this moment for months. Where they had anticipated civilian populations ripe for conquest, they encountered hardened populations that had been quietly evacuated to prepared positions. Where they had planned lightning strikes against soft targets, they found themselves facing defensive strategies that seemed designed specifically to counter their operational doctrine. Status report from Sector 7, reported Colonel Martinez from his position at the Intelligence Coordination Station. His voice carried the professional calm of someone who had learned to find hope in desperate circumstances. The hegemony probe force encountered what they believed to be a lightly defended agricultural world. Turns out it was a prepared kill zone with concealed orbital platforms and a full Marine regiment.
Admiral Chen nodded grimly.
Similar reports were coming in from across the combat zone as hegemony forces discovered that their intelligence had been incomplete in ways that were costing them ships, personnel, and strategic momentum. Ghost's downloaded data had provided human command with complete enemy battle plans, but, more importantly, it had revealed the fundamental assumptions underlying hegemony strategy. They had seen human colonies as isolated targets rather than components of an integrated defensive network. They had interpreted civilian infrastructure as weakness rather than camouflaged military preparation. They had understood human political decentralization as strategic confusion rather than operational flexibility designed to make total conquest impossible. "Sir," called Lieutenant Commander Park from the communications station, "we're receiving transmission from the hegemony command ship.
They're requesting parley under standard galactic protocols."
After 3 weeks of their lightning offensive stalling against prepared defenses, Colonel Martinez observed dryly.
Interesting timing for diplomatic outreach.
Admiral Chen studied the tactical display, noting the positions where hegemony forces had been stopped, pushed back, or eliminated entirely. The enemy's numerical advantage was being systematically eroded by defensive strategies that forced them to attack prepared positions with insufficient intelligence about what they were really facing.
Their confidence was transforming into caution, their aggression into uncertainty. Put them through, she decided.
Let's see what Commander Zarathul has to say about her strategic situation. The main display flickered to life, revealing the bridge of a hegemony command vessel that showed clear signs of recent combat damage. Commander Zarathul appeared older than her intelligence file photos, her predatory confidence replaced by the wariness of someone who had learned to respect an enemy she had previously dismissed. Her forearms moved in gestures that suggested controlled frustration rather than casual arrogance. "Admiral Chen," she began, her translator rendering her words with mechanical precision, "I am authorized to discuss terms for the cessation of hostilities in this sector."
"Terms?" Admiral Chen replied with polite interest.
"I was under the impression that your forces were conducting what you called final pacification operations against human colonies.
Have circumstances changed?"
The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Around the operations center, human officers maintained professional composure while internally savoring the shift in tactical dynamics that had brought their enemy to the negotiating table.
3 weeks earlier, the hegemony had been preparing to crush human resistance through overwhelming force.
Now they were requesting parley from a position of strategic weakness. "Circumstances have indeed evolved," Zarathul admitted with obvious reluctance. human defensive capabilities appear to have been significantly underestimated in our initial assessments.
Your colonies have proven more resistant to conventional assault than anticipated. Conventional assault, Colonel Martinez murmured quietly, his voice pitched for Admiral Chan's ears alone.
Interesting choice of words.
Suggests they're considering unconventional alternatives. Admiral Chan nodded slightly while maintaining her external focus on the diplomatic exchange.
The hegemony's frustration with their stalled offensive might lead them to escalate beyond the boundaries of civilized warfare, but such escalation would also provide justification for responses that humanity had been preparing but hoping not to use. "Commander," she said with formal courtesy, "human colonies have the right to defend themselves against unprovoked aggression. If your forces are encountering resistance, perhaps you should reconsider the wisdom of attacking peaceful civilian populations." Zarathal's expression shifted to something that might have been grudging respect. "Your defensive preparations were more extensive than our intelligence indicated. The agricultural world in Sector 7, for example, was reported to have minimal orbital defenses. Instead, our assault force encountered concealed weapon platforms and military personnel that inflicted 60% casualties before we were forced to withdraw." "I'm sorry to hear about your losses," Admiral Chan replied with apparent sincerity. "War is always tragic, especially when it could have been avoided through diplomatic means." The conversation continued in the formal language of military diplomacy, each side probing for advantage while maintaining the fiction of civilized discourse. But, beneath the polite surface, both commanders understood that they were negotiating from positions shaped by intelligence that had been purchased with blood and sacrifice. Ghost's mission had provided human command with complete knowledge of hegemony battle plans, fleet positions, and strategic assumptions. More importantly, it had revealed the enemy's fundamental misunderstanding of human defensive philosophy. The hegemony expected centralized command structures that could be decapitated, static defenses that could be bypassed, and civilian populations that would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. Instead, they had encountered distributed command networks that could function despite heavy losses, dynamic defenses that adapted to changing tactical conditions, and civilian populations that had been quietly transformed into military assets over months of careful preparation. "Admiral," Zarathal said after several minutes of diplomatic maneuvering, "I believe we both understand that continued military operations in this sector will result in casualties that neither of our governments desires. Perhaps we can discuss territorial boundaries that would satisfy both sides' strategic requirements." "Territorial boundaries," Admiral Chan repeated thoughtfully. "You mean the boundaries that existed before your forces began their unprovoked offensive against human colonies?" "I believe those are still marked on all the standard navigation charts." The diplomatic exchange continued for another hour, with both sides exploring the possibilities for ending the conflict without either side losing face completely. The hegemony needed some token of success to justify their offensive to their own population, while humanity needed assurance that their colonies would be safe from future aggression. Eventually, they reached a preliminary agreement for a ceasefire that would allow both sides to withdraw to positions that existed before the offensive began. It was not a victory in the traditional sense, but it was an end to hostilities that would allow human colonies to continue their peaceful development without the threat of conquest hanging over them. As the transmission ended, Admiral Chen turned to address her staff with the controlled satisfaction of someone who had achieved strategic objectives through means that would never appear in official records. "Status of our special operations teams?" she asked. "Ghost and Anvil teams successfully completed their primary objectives," Colonel Martinez reported. "Intelligence gathering missions provided complete enemy battle plans and strategic assessments. Direct action missions eliminated 15% of enemy assault capability and forced them to delay their offensive timeline by 4 months. Casualties? Anvil team extracted successfully with minor injuries. Ghost team." He paused, consulting his reports with obvious reluctance. Dr. Kim, Communications Officer Vasquez, and Engineer Rodriguez were recovered from escape pods approximately 40 light-years from the target zone. Captain Chen was listed as missing, presumed killed in action. Admiral Chen nodded slowly, her expression reflecting the weight of command decisions that sent good people into impossible situations. Ghost had been one of their best, a specialist whose unique combination of skills and experience had made him invaluable for exactly this sort of mission. His loss was a significant blow to their operational capabilities, but his sacrifice had achieved objectives that would save millions of lives.
Recommendations for commendations, she asked.
The entire Ghost team should receive the highest decorations we can award for operations that will never be officially acknowledged, Colonel Martinez replied. Their intelligence gathering and direct action results directly enabled our successful defense of this sector.
See to it, Admiral Chen ordered.
And make sure that Captain Chen's family receives full benefits and honors, even if we can't tell them exactly what he died accomplishing. She turned back to the tactical display, studying the positions where hegemony forces were beginning their withdrawal from human space. The immediate threat was over, but the larger strategic situation remained complex. Other enemy civilizations would be watching to see how humanity responded to aggression, and the lessons learned here would influence future conflicts throughout this region of the galaxy.
Colonel, what's the status of our defensive preparations in adjacent sectors?
Enhanced readiness across all frontier colonies, he replied. The intelligence data from Ghost Team has allowed us to identify similar preparation patterns by other hostile civilizations.
We're implementing defensive measures before they can achieve operational surprise.
It was a sobering reminder that the galaxy contained many threats, and that humanity's survival depended on maintaining constant vigilance against enemies who viewed peaceful civilizations as prey. The hegemony had been stopped, but they were not the only predators prowling the darkness between the stars. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez sat in a comfortable chair in the intelligence debriefing facility on Kepler Station, sipping coffee that tasted like civilization while reviewing her final mission reports. The documents spread across her desk contained sanitized versions of events that would eventually become part of the historical record, though the full truth would remain classified for decades. Dr. Sarah Kim entered the room with the quiet professionalism that had marked her service throughout their mission. Her medical expertise had proven invaluable during their escape and recovery, but she carried herself with the slight weariness of someone who had seen too much violence in service of necessary objectives. "Any word from the review board?" she asked, settling into the chair across from Elena's desk. "Complete mission success," Elena replied, holding up the official commendation that bore signatures from the highest levels of human military command. Intelligence objectives achieved, strategic impact confirmed, and defensive preparations validated through successful implementation. We're officially heroes, even if no one outside this facility will ever know what we really did. Tom Rodriguez knocked on the door and entered without waiting for permission, carrying coffee and the satisfied expression of someone who had recently completed a challenging technical project. His demolitions expertise had made their escape possible, and his debriefing sessions had provided valuable intelligence about hegemony ship design and defensive systems. "They're naming a new class of defensive platforms after our mission designation," he announced with obvious pride.
The Ghost-class orbital defense system will be deployed throughout the frontier sectors.
Apparently, our little expedition proved that properly placed explosives can solve almost any tactical problem. Elena smiled at her teammates' enthusiasm, though her expression carried undertones of loss that would never completely fade. Their mission had been successful by any objective measure, but success had come at a cost that made celebration feel inappropriate.
"Any updates on the captain?" Dr. Kim asked quietly. Elena shook her head. "Search and rescue operations found debris from the Hegemony battlecruiser scattered across 3 light-years of space. Reactor containment failure with no survivors, no recoverable remains. He's officially listed as killed in action, died in the performance of his duty." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in memories of a mission that had begun as intelligence gathering and ended as something that would influence the strategic balance of power throughout this sector of the galaxy. Ghost had been more than their captain, he had been the calm center around which their team had functioned, the steady presence that made impossible missions seem achievable. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Tom said eventually. That moment when he dropped the merchant Captain Acton became something else entirely. Like watching a mask come off to reveal who he really was underneath. "I don't think Ghost was who he really was either," Elena replied thoughtfully. "I think he was just another mask, another identity that he wore when circumstances required it. The real Marcus Chen might have been someone completely different, maybe someone who wanted nothing more than to be a peaceful merchant captain hauling cargo between the colonies." Dr. Kim nodded slowly.
But, when the galaxy threatened people he had sworn to protect, he became whatever was necessary to stop that threat.
Even if it meant sacrificing everything he was or could have been.
It was a sobering reflection on the nature of service and sacrifice, the way that good people sometimes had to become monsters in order to prevent greater monstrosities from consuming innocent lives. Ghost had made that transformation willingly, knowing the cost and accepting it as the price of protecting something larger than himself. The final intelligence assessment just came through, Elena said, activating her personal data display. The hegemony has officially redesignated human space as hostile territory requiring extreme caution. They're recommending against future expansion into our sector without overwhelming force superiority and detailed intelligence about actual defensive capabilities. Which means they learned the lesson we were trying to teach, Tom observed with satisfaction.
Don't underestimate humans just because we look peaceful on the surface.
More than that, Dr. Kim added. They learned that humans are willing to pay whatever price is necessary to protect their people and their way of life.
That's a lesson that other potential enemies will hear about through diplomatic channels and intelligence networks. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying the intelligence reports that documented humanity's new reputation throughout this region of the galaxy.
Where they had once been seen as scattered, weak, and suitable for conquest, they were now regarded as dangerous, unpredictable, and capable of response far out of proportion to apparent capability. It was not the reputation that peaceful colonists would have chosen, but it was the reputation that would keep them safe in a galaxy where predators respected only strength and the will to use it without restraint. Ghost would have been proud, she said quietly. His mission was to gather intelligence. But what he really did was send a message to every potential enemy in the sector: humans are not prey. We're something else entirely, and the wise thing to do is leave us alone. Dr. Kim raised her coffee cup in a quiet salute. To Marcus Chen, whoever he really was. He chose to become a monster so that children could sleep safely in their beds on 47 human worlds. Tom and Elena raised their cups as well, honoring the memory of someone who had worn many faces and borne many names, but who had ultimately defined himself through the choice to sacrifice everything for people he would never meet on worlds he would never see. Outside the facility, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns above colonies where families went about their daily lives in peace, unaware that their safety had been purchased with the blood of people whose names would never be recorded in history books. In the darkness between those stars, patrol ships maintained their vigilant watches, ready to send messages that potential enemies throughout the galaxy were finally beginning to understand. Humanity had spoken in the language that predators understood best: absolute, uncompromising violence applied with precision and without mercy against those who threatened innocence. The message had been received, acknowledged, and filed away in intelligence databases throughout the sector. The message was simple: just because we look like easy prey doesn't mean you should try to eat us. Some of us bite back. And when we bite, we don't let go until the threat is eliminated or we are